Sterling's restaurant glowed with warm lights that night, crystal chandeliers casting a soft brilliance over elegant dresses and the clinking of glasses. But for me, tonight wasn't a celebration. It was a stage. And Jack, the husband who had stood beside me for 6 years, was unknowingly preparing for his final performance. I smoothed the hem of my deep blue dress, the same color Jack once mocked as too old-fashioned for a college professor. My fingers brushed against the sharp edge of an envelope inside my clutch. Cold. Precise. Just like everything Jack had taught me about himself. Guests gathered around the long table draped in pristine white linen. Jack's people were seated to his right. Partners, financial advisors, board members. My family, of course, had been pushed to the far end, an afterthought in the power play Jack orchestrated tonight. He rose, lifting a glass of red wine dark as blood. 6 years ago, I was told to marry a simple, obedient woman, and so I chose Avery, the literature graduate always lost in fictional worlds, clueless about reality. Laughter erupted, some polite, some genuinely amused. Across the table, my mother-in-law maintained her usual feigned smile, though her hands gripped the napkin beneath the table tightly. But it turns out, simplicity comes with a price, Jack continued, pausing for effect. 6 years of investment in a docile wife. And sometimes I wonder if I've spent too much on a product that yields no returns. His words sliced through the room, the air turned heavy with silence. Still, I smiled. Not the kind of forced smile Jack was used to, but one of quiet certainty. Unhurriedly, I opened my clutch, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it gently on the silk-covered table. My voice was calm, steady, sharper than any freshly honed blade. Thank you, Jack, that was memorable, but since we're discussing investments and returns, perhaps our guests should know a few interesting figures. Jack's gaze flickered. I opened the folder, sliding it toward him, 2 pages side by side. The original prenuptial agreement I signed 6 years ago, and the altered version he had tampered with. This is the original contract I signed, and this is your edited version. Clever, Jack. But not clever enough to fool a forensic legal expert. A wave of murmurs swept across the table. Some guests frowned at the documents, others discreetly checked their phones. You thought I wouldn't notice, didn't you? Just like you thought I wouldn't notice your sweet little messages to Harper, your sister's college friend. I retrieved my phone, tapping a single command. Instantly, notification chimes filled the room. Faces lit up with the glow of screens as they scrolled through intimate, not-so-subtle messages Jack had exchanged for over a year. She's so clueless she still thinks I'm working late. Same place tomorrow night, can't wait to see you. I read aloud, my eyes never leaving Jack's. Color drained from his face, the confident facade peeled away, like old paint cracking under pressure. My tone remained even. Instead of congratulating your unprofitable investment, perhaps we should toast to your brilliant financial career. After all, as of tonight, you're no longer the majority shareholder of Helix Group. The sharp crack of a wine glass shattering in Jack's grip echoed through the hall, but before he could speak, I calmly collected my folder, straightened my dress, and walked away from the table, as if concluding just another routine meeting. Jack's performance had ended, but my story was only beginning. If you ask me when it all started, I couldn't tell you precisely. Maybe it was the first time Jack walked into my tiny rental apartment, glanced at my shelves of classic novels and joked, "You must be good at living in these make-believe worlds, huh? I had smiled then. A smile that Jack himself would later teach me to perfect, to conceal, to deflect, to disarm. Throughout our first year of marriage, Jack meticulously built the image of a self-made man shouldering all burdens, while I was conveniently cast as the quiet wife, immersed in books and quaint afternoon teas. He paid the bills, handled investments, conducted business meetings, while I was encouraged to focus on lighter things. The message was clear: stay out of his world. And I did, outwardly. I closed unfinished manuscripts, tucked them back onto the shelves, and turned my attention to observing the man who thought himself untouchable. Every time Jack took a phone call, casually discussing shady investments, he assumed I was too naive to understand. He even patted my hand once, chuckling. "Don't worry yourself, honey. The financial world is far too complex for dreamers like you." I nodded quietly. But instead of feeling hurt, I started listening. Every phone call, every contract Jack carelessly left on the kitchen counter, I memorized them all. I learned to recognize his favorite phrases, tax optimization, asset relocation, equity restructuring. Words that sounded sophisticated but were nothing more than veils for his shady dealings. Gradually I built my own system. Every night, after Jack fell asleep, I transferred the photos of those documents onto a separate hard drive, secured with a password that Jack would never bother to remember. I kept a journal, not for emotions, but to organize every loose piece of information he inadvertently exposed. Ironically, Jack's arrogance made it easier. He would take calls right in front of me, never suspecting I could distinguish real money from fabricated numbers. While I folded laundry on the sofa, he casually discussed cleaning up investments through a shell charity. When I watered the plants on the balcony, he openly planned fake companies in Delaware. Each time, I observed in silence. The quieter I stayed, the more Jack revealed who he truly was. By the second year I began testing my limits. I would ask Jack offhand questions like, if I wanted to write about financial crimes, where should I start? He'd laugh, explaining as if teaching a child, growing increasingly careless. From those condescending lessons, I learned more practical knowledge than any university course could offer. By the third year, Jack no longer bothered to hide anything. He'd leave contract folders on the dining table, discuss sensitive matters with his lawyer right in our living room. She only cares about her novels, he'd scoff to a partner. I didn't react. I simply kept folding the tablecloth, playing the role he assigned me. In truth, every overlooked detail was safely stored. By the fourth year, I wasn't documenting out of wounded pride anymore. It had become a methodical operation. Anonymous emails, scanned contracts, recordings disguised as music files. I learned to trace money flows, uncovering how office expenses were actually invoices from shell companies. I even reconnected with old acquaintances, not Jack's circle, but people who once looked down on me the same way he did. A few economics professors, an old friend who worked in auditing, all under the guise of research for my novel. They taught me to read balance sheets, to spot irregularities in financial transactions. Jack, meanwhile, remained engrossed in his image of a successful businessman, signing documents for me without a second glance. Every signature, every small punctuation mark in those contracts, I preserved meticulously. By the fifth year, when every puzzle piece was in place, I was no longer the obedient wife Jack believed me to be. I held the entire picture. Jack only saw the reflection of his own arrogance, but from the quiet sidelines I had long discerned which parts of him were real, and which were carefully crafted lies. I didn't need to shatter that illusion immediately. I simply had to wait for it to collapse under the weight of his own contempt. That afternoon, a sudden downpour swept across the city. I had just finished teaching my final class of the semester, still holding a stack of ungraded papers, when Jack texted. Running late, urgent meeting. I was used to it. Those clipped, impersonal messages had become routine over the past year, sounding more like a boss texting his assistant than a husband speaking to his wife. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. Jack assumed my silence meant I still believed him. His mistake was thinking I remained as trusting as 6 years ago. That evening, with the house to myself, I decided to organize the bookshelf in his study, the place he assumed I only entered to dust off my old novels. But tonight, I wasn't looking for books. In the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet was an old laptop Jack often took on business trips. I had seen him hastily plugging it in, entering passwords, thinking I wasn't paying attention. But he forgot I had been observing his every habit for 5 years. I knew he used his mother's birthday for every important password. The laptop powered up slowly, as if reluctant to reveal what lay within. Then a notification appeared in the lower right corner. One unread email. Sender, Lee. Samantha, the college friend of Jack's sister. The woman who always hugged me a little too long at family gatherings, her sweet smile never quite reaching her eyes. I clicked. Last night was amazing. Wonder if your wife noticed anything, but I remember every little detail. My grip on the mouse tightened. The link below opened an entire thread of messages, blurry snapshots and flirtatious exchanges, more than enough to understand that Jack and Samantha had been seeing each other for at least 6 months. I scrolled through each message, eyes fixed, unblinking. Every urgent meeting, every last-minute business trip, featured Samantha. They met at boutique hotels on 16th Street, the same places Jack once deemed beneath his client standards. Now, Those places were his secret getaway for weekday rendezvous. There was one message that made me pause. Samantha wrote, "Your wife really is the type who'll never know what's going on around her. I still remember meeting her at Thanksgiving. So funny watching her talk about classic novels while you and I were together downstairs." In that moment, I didn't feel the pain I thought I would. Instead, there was a strange clarity. Not because of the betrayal, but because Jack's contempt for me had never been limited to business. He didn't just see me as an outsider in his financial world. He saw me as a joke in our marriage. Both Jack and Samantha assumed that as long as I played the part of the quiet wife, I would never get close to the truth. But they forgot something simple. The one who reads the most classic novels is the one who knows how to wait for the ending. I didn't rush to take screenshots. I didn't need to sneakily save these conversations anymore. Jack's old laptop would be the perfect evidence. I only needed to back up the data onto a personal hard drive. A small device that fit in my palm but held every lie Jack had worked so hard to hide. When Jack came home that night, the rain still drizzled against the porch. He kissed my cheek as usual, his eyes barely glancing at the stack of graded papers on the table, never noticing the tiny hard drive I had just tucked away in the drawer. I kept my usual smile, asked him about his urgent meeting, made him tea as if everything was still under his control. But from that moment everything had changed. I no longer documented things out of wounded pride or to prove my worth to a man like Jack. I documented to prepare for the day when all that contempt would be exposed. Publicly. Clearly. Unmistakably. And I already knew exactly when that day would come. Jack still thought he controlled everything in the palm of his hand. Meanwhile, I had learned to turn the things he most despised into the sharpest weapons. 3 days after discovering the messages between Jack and Samantha, I arranged a meeting with Elena Carter, a former college classmate who now worked as a financial and divorce attorney in Boston. I texted Elena with the perfect excuse: "Need advice for a character I'm writing." Elena knew my habit of obsessing over details, so she didn't suspect anything when I invited her to a quiet cafe near Riverside. We sat in a corner by the window where the soft autumn light filtered through, gentle yet sharp enough to reveal what needed to be seen. "I'm working on a character, a wife who discovers her husband is committing financial fraud. I'm curious, how does the law handle it if she gathers evidence herself?" I asked, my tone as casual as if discussing a plot twist. Elena chuckled, shaking her head. "Who is this wife character? Another woman who seems harmless but turns out to be dangerously clever?" I smiled faintly, neither confirming nor denying. Elena was still as sharp as she had been in college. She explained the legality of one-party consent recordings in Massachusetts and the circumstances under which a wife could lawfully retain financial documents to protect her marital rights. "But be careful, Avery. If your story is real, gathering financial intel requires a strategy. Once he realizes, things won't be so simple." I nodded. Elena didn't know that this story was unfolding inside my own home. After that meeting, our coffee catch-ups became more frequent. Officially, we discussed novel ideas. In reality, each conversation was a legal briefing in disguise. I learned how to ask innocent questions while extracting razor-sharp information: how to file a financial fraud report, how to authenticate internal documents, how to challenge a prenuptial agreement altered post-signature. It was through one of these literary research chats that Elena introduced me to a crucial name, Jonathan Myers, a forensic accounting expert who had helped several financial abuse victims expose complex fraud schemes. "You'll probably think you're an eccentric writer obsessed with finance, but that's the best shield you can have," Elena winked. At my first meeting with Jonathan, I brought along a folder labeled "Research Materials for a Novel," filled with copies of Jack's discarded investment contracts. Jonathan reviewed them, his professional frown deepening. "Are you certain this is fiction? Because if these numbers are real, your character's husband is teetering on the edge of serious legal trouble." I simply smiled, playing the part of a writer out of her depth. From that day, Jonathan became a silent piece in my plan. He analyzed every expense Jack had claimed, traced how charitable donations were actually asset transfers, and most importantly, he was the first to uncover that my prenuptial agreement had been tampered with. "Your signature is real, but these clauses are not from the original contract. The person who made the changes did a skillful job, but there are still traces. And that's all we need," Jonathan concluded. "Which makes this entire agreement invalid." I thanked him, feeling as if a long loose link had finally been tightened. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how severely Jack had underestimated me. He casually brought home critical documents, mixing them with grocery receipts and junk mail. Some evenings while Jack was busy making calls in his office, I would sit quietly in the living room, pretending to research for class, all the while listening to his plans of transferring shady funds through Cayman Islands accounts. I recorded every conversation. No drama, no fuss, just small, discreet recording devices hidden inside the wall clock. Ironically, the one Jack himself had chosen. I also prepared multiple layers of backup for every piece of evidence. External hard drives, printed documents, anonymous cloud storage. I left no loophole that could be used against me. Over time, I realized patience was no longer just a facade. It had become my greatest strength. Every time Jack dismissed me at social events, every time he scoffed when I mentioned my world of books, I saw it more clearly. The more he looked down on me, the more I tightened my grip on the perfect ending. And I knew that day couldn't be a rushed blow. It had to be a precise strike, well-timed, powerful, and ruthless enough to make Jack understand his dreamy little wife had never been idly lost in fiction. I was right here, in reality, and every single minute I had been getting ready. The second floor of the Lancaster Hotel shimmered under golden lights, reflecting off white silk drapes and meticulously arranged rose bouquets. Our 6th wedding anniversary. Or rather, the final act of a 6-year-long play. Jack stood at the center of the banquet hall, greeting guests with the confident smile I once admired, now just a fragile mask. A week ago he had signed his biggest deal of the year and was basking in the glow of being the successful husband. I wore an ivory satin dress, the same one Jack once sneered at as too old-fashioned for someone like you. It didn't matter. Tonight I didn't need to stand out. I only needed the composure to watch him bring himself down. Avery, you look lovely tonight, just your style, safe, modest, and forgettable, Jack whispered into my ear with that familiar condescending tone. I smiled, my hand brushing the clutch that held the folder. A USB drive and Elena Carter's business card. The lawyer friend who had helped weave this entire counterstrike. I had played the role of the obedient wife for 5 years. One more evening wouldn't hurt. The party carried on with boisterous laughter. Jack's business acquaintances toasted to his success, shaking hands and exchanging compliments. My family was seated quietly at a side table, near the exit, as part of Jack's carefully curated social hierarchy. I observed silently, reminding myself to breathe evenly, just a little longer. Around 8 p.m., as the wine had loosened every tongue with self-congratulatory stories, Jack stood, raising his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here to celebrate 6 years of unwavering partnership between Avery and me. 6 years might sound long, but in a career, it's merely a brief stop. And sometimes, such stops require a companion who knows when to stay silent and when to smile without asking questions. Polite chuckles rippled through the room. Jack was used to this. He relished controlling the narrative, delivering each line with the perfect balance of charm and subtle condescension. I'm fortunate to have Avery. She understands the value of knowing her place. A literature professor, immersed in worlds of Gatsby and Anna Karenina, blissfully detached from the complexities of finance and business. That's what makes her the ideal wife, a partner who doesn't interfere. I heard my mother exhale sharply from the back of the room. My sister squeezed her husband's hand, her eyes darting toward me with concern, but I simply smiled and stood slowly as the lackluster applause died down. Thank you, Jack. That was a memorable speech, but perhaps we should also thank our guests for being here tonight, because I believe this evening will be remembered for much more than knowing one's place. I opened my clutch, retrieved the folder, and placed it gently on the table in front of Jack. My voice remained calm, not a single note higher than usual. This is your 6-year anniversary gift, Jack. A contract, not a financial one, but our original marriage contract. Jack froze. Whispers rippled through the room as I unfolded 2 sheets of paper side by side. One was the prenuptial agreement I signed 6 years ago, the other was the version he had so meticulously altered. Perhaps you thought I couldn't tell the difference between a legal clause and a paragraph from a novel. Funny, isn't it? You've always underestimated a literature teacher's reading comprehension. The room gradually fell silent. Jack reached to close the folder, but I pulled out a USB drive, placing it neatly beside the papers. This contains recordings of your company's internal meetings, discussions about tax evasion strategies, creating fake funds, and forging documents. You once said it was all too complicated for me to understand. Fortunately, my friend, Attorney Elena Carter, understands it perfectly. At that very moment the banquet doors swung open. Elena entered, walking straight toward us, carrying a document case. No introduction was needed. The look on Jack's face was enough for everyone to realize this was no coincidence. Good evening, Jack. We met at the Boston conference, remember? I'm not here for dinner tonight, but to deliver some important documents. Elena placed a thick folder on the table, her tone polite but cold. I glanced at Jack. Beads of sweat formed on his temple. His trusted friends exchanged uneasy glances. A few pulled out their phones, pretending to check messages, desperate to avoid the heavy atmosphere spreading through the room. And by the way, I continued, I think everyone here deserves to know about your special relationship with Samantha Lee. The messages, the photos, have just been sent to every guest in this room. Right on cue, phones chimed in unison. No one spoke, but the silence was heavier than any accusation. Jack gripped the edge of the table, his face turning pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but Elena cut him off first. I'd advise you to remain silent, Jack. From this moment forward, anything you say will be considered within a legal context. I looked around the room. Every eye was now fixed on us. But this time, I wasn't the invisible wife standing behind her husband. I took one step forward. Ocean's battle? I'd waited long enough to never lower my head again. The air in the banquet hall grew suffocating. Phones buzzed relentlessly as everyone read the stream of messages I had exposed. Jack's flirtatious words to Samantha Lee, mixed with after-hours photos they thought were their secret. Jack scanned the room, his gaze seeking help from familiar faces. But no one spoke. The same partners who once shook his hand and toasted to his success now avoided his eyes, quietly distancing themselves from the center table. This is all a misunderstanding. Jack forced a smile, but it was crooked, brittle, making the room even more uncomfortable. I stood there, composed, as Elena pulled a stack of divorce papers from her case and laid them gently in front of Jack. These are official documents, Jack. A copy has already been submitted to Suffolk County Court. They include a petition to nullify the prenuptial agreement due to evidence of fraud, along with comprehensive proof of your tax evasion and falsification of financial records. Jack stiffened. The fake composure he had worn cracked visibly as layers of his usual confidence were peeled away without mercy. You think these cheap novel tricks can bring me down? Jack snarled. All you have is a pile of papers patched together from your imagination. Elena didn't respond, but right then the banquet doors opened once more. 3 men in gray suits entered the room, their cold, sharp gazes swept across the space before landing on Jack's pale face. Mr. Jack Hamilton? The man in front spoke, his voice deep and firm. We are with the Federal Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of tax evasion, financial fraud, and falsification of federal documents. A murmur rippled through the crowd like an undercurrent. Jack stepped back, trying to maintain his composure, but his fingers clenched so tightly they turned white. This is a mistake. I fully cooperated with the IRS. He turned to his silent business partners. We all know financial restructuring is standard practice. None of this is new to anyone here. But no one spoke in his defense. Even David Parker, once considered Jack's right-hand man, quietly stood up, grabbed his coat, and avoided Jack's gaze. I'm sorry, Jack, but I can't be involved in this. Good luck. David said softly, then walked away. Jack's lips pressed into a thin line as he watched him leave. Then he spun toward me. What did you do? Did you report me? I didn't answer immediately. I simply pulled from my handbag a copy of the whistleblower report I had filed with the IRS 3 months earlier, along with a detailed log of financial evidence Jonathan, Elena, and I had compiled. I did exactly what a wife who knows nothing about finance should do, Jack. I protected myself. The silence in the room was colder than the wind outside. Jack knew there was no way out. What do you want? Money? Are you trying to humiliate me for leverage? His voice was harsh, but the confidence had drained away, leaving only desperation clinging to every word. I want the truth in its rightful place, I replied, my tone calm, almost gentle. As for the price of underestimating people, Jack, that's for you to reckon with. The agent stepped forward, removing a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Mr. Jack Hamilton, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Jack recoiled, his eyes locked onto mine. You'll regret humiliating me in front of all these people, Avery. I looked at him, neither angry nor bitter, just the steady gaze of someone who had waited far too long to see the truth beneath a polished facade. No, Jack, what I want is for you to finally realize that the person who destroyed you isn't me. It's the man you chose to become. The cold click of handcuffs echoed through the room. Jack was led away under the watchful eyes of everyone present. Those who once held him as a standard of success now kept their distance, fearful of the fallout. As Jack disappeared through the doors, Elena placed a light hand on my shoulder. Are you all right? I took a deep breath, my gaze lingering on the banquet table where Jack's arrogant laughter had filled the air just moments ago. I'm all right, just pitying a man who once had everything. And lost it all because he never learned to respect the woman he deemed the stupidest. 3 months after that fateful night at the Lancaster Hotel, I stood at the lectern of Riverside College, listening to the soft scratch of pencils and the curious eyes of students fixed on me. So, in The Great Gatsby, do you think Daisy truly loved Gatsby, or was it merely the image of him she adored? I asked, smiling slightly as hands slowly raised. I was still a literature professor, as I had been for years, but for the first time I no longer felt small in my own classroom. My name now read Avery Hamilton Carter. The small plaque on my desk had been replaced, marking an entirely new chapter in my life, one of agency and freedom. After class, I gathered my materials and stepped into the campus courtyard, where April sunlight warmed the budding trees. In my handbag was the manuscript of my first book, already scheduled for a meeting with the publisher, Hidden Truths, A Woman's Guide to Financial Self-Defense. No one mocked my fanciful writing hobby anymore. The publishing contract wasn't as flashy as the figures Jack used to boast about, but, to me, it was the result of patience and hard-earned lessons. On Thursday afternoons, the small community room on Waterstone Street lit up earlier than usual. There, I hosted a small study group for women. Those who had once struggled with complex financial jargon, who had signed documents they never truly understood. We'll start with the simplest concept. The right to understand your own money. That's how I opened each session every single week. Each week more women joined. A young scholarship student, a single mother juggling piles of bills, women who had once been silent supporters behind successful husbands. Each story was a slice of pain, seemingly unique yet eerily familiar. Then one afternoon, as I was arranging my materials, the door opened. Samantha Lee stood at the threshold. Her wool coat couldn't hide the weight she had clearly lost. The once self-assured gleam in her eyes was now replaced with hesitation. I saw the flyer for this group on the community board, Samantha said, her voice softer than I remembered. I'm not sure if I belong here, but I'd like to try. The room fell silent for a moment. Not because they knew who she was, but because of what my reaction would be. I looked at her, not with bitterness, not with contempt, simply seeing another woman standing where I once stood, lost, left behind by illusions she had believed in. No one here was born fit for finance, I replied. But anyone willing to learn how to protect themselves is welcome. Samantha gave a slight nod, quietly taking a seat at the back of the room. I continued the lesson, explaining how to spot unfavorable clauses in contracts, how to read basic financial reports. Occasionally, my gaze would sweep over to Samantha. She sat in silence, diligently taking notes, with none of the arrogance she once wore so effortlessly. I hadn't forgotten what happened, but I no longer lived in the shadow of betrayal, because right now I was writing my own story. Not for revenge. But so every woman who had ever been belittled would know that sometimes silence is the most meticulous preparation for the day they finally speak up. Afternoons in Riverside were usually quiet like this. Sunlight streamed through wooden window frames, casting a warm golden glow across the worn hardwood floors of the community room. But today that light carried a different tone. I stood before a group of women listening intently. On the board was a scribbled phrase in white chalk. Financial knowledge is not a privilege. I was no longer Jack Hamilton's wife, nor did I need to be a victim of a failed marriage. I was simply Avery, a woman once underestimated, who had lived in the shadow of others and had learned to stand tall on her own. Each woman in front of me carried her own story. Some were trapped in credit card debt, some had signed contracts only to realize in divorce they had no claim to the assets they helped build. There were young women, new to the workforce, overwhelmed by a maze of financial terms. I looked at them, and in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Finance is not just about numbers, it's about choice, freedom, and not letting others define your worth. I spoke slowly, letting each word settle in the air. In the corner, Samantha Lee, The woman whose name once made my skin crawl was diligently taking notes. Whether she joined out of guilt, awakening, or simply because she had nowhere else to go, didn't matter anymore. I had moved past anger. I had learned a powerful lesson. Forgiveness is not forgetting, nor is it accepting the wrong. Forgiveness is when you're strong enough to let go of what no longer defines you. That day, as the session ended, a young woman named Lily approached me. She had been one of the first to sign up for this group and had always been the quietest. "I always thought I was stupid for not understanding finance," she said, nervously twisting the strap of her bag. "But you've shown me that doesn't mean I have to accept being deceived." I nodded gently. "Never let anyone make you believe you're incapable just because you don't speak their language. We can learn, and once we understand, no one can take that power from us." Lily smiled. That smile reminded me of myself years ago, when I believed silence was the way to maintain peace, that being accommodating was a form of love. Now I understood. Sometimes silence is merely a shell for things not yet ready to speak, but when that voice finally rises, it must be clear, resolute, and unwavering. The story of Jack Hamilton continues out there, in the headlines, in the ongoing courtrooms, but for me, everything ended the moment I stepped out from the shadow he had cast. Because the greatest power Jack believed he held was nothing more than an illusion fed by my own quiet compliance. Now it's different. Now I am the one writing my own script. In the months that followed, my small study group gradually became a support network. From hesitant conversations, we built in-depth workshops, contract reading sessions, and even seminars on salary negotiations and personal investments. No need for noise. No need for display. Each woman here is quietly rewriting her own story, little by little, with patience and resilience. And I, the woman who once thought she belonged only among old, dusty books, now witness this transformation every day. When the final class of the spring session ended, I gathered my materials, turned off the lights, and stood still, looking at the whiteboard with its faded words from our last discussion. I knew my story had reached a full stop. But behind that period, a new line was waiting to be written. A story that no longer begins with who I'm married to, but simply with a woman who knows what she wants, knows how to protect it, and is at peace with not needing anyone else's validation but her own. Avery's story isn't just the end of a deceitful marriage, it's the beginning of a woman who dared to step out from the shadow others drew for her. From a dutiful wife, Avery quietly gathered the truth, patiently learned, and rewrote her destiny with intelligence and resilience. Today, she is no longer a victim, nor does she need recognition. Avery's greatest success is turning pain into strength, helping other women stand tall on their own feet. What do you think about Avery's journey? Share your thoughts on the story and the character in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel to discover more meaningful stories about family, marriage, and life's valuable lessons.